4, 3, 2. You're good.
Hi, I'm Dennis Speed. I want to welcome you to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre, and Diane will be with us in just a moment. We're going to be having a kind of more informal discussion tonight. We've got several people that are going to be joining us, but just before we get to that, we want to make you aware of a statement that was issued through the Schiller Institute. You can find it at the Schiller Institute site, schillerinstitute.org. And it's called Exonerate LaRouche, referring to Lyndon LaRouche. Exonerate LaRouche, Assange, Snowden pardons can expose the Russiagate hoax. And what the statement basically does, which you're not going to read to you here, is it talks about the idea that if the president, Donald Trump, were to pardon WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, as well as do some other actions, that what could happen now that Attorney General William Barr has resigned is that it would be possible for new documents and other documents that have been unclassified but unreleased, which would in fact show that the entire story that we've been being told for the past 4.5 years around Russiagate is not true. And that would be a game changer. That could even be an elections changer. And what's important about the statement, what it goes through, it has a couple of subtitles. One subtitle is British intelligence, not Russia or China, is the foreign actor. That's particularly important because of all of the recent statements concerning Chinese ownership of the Dominion voting machines and the discussions about Venezuela and this one and that one. And what the statement contends is that if you really want to find the actors, you name people like Christopher Steele, Richard Hannigan, Sir Richard Dearlove, and Sir Kim Darak. All those people are British subjects. Many of them are British intelligence agents. And they are the authors of the dossier that was used in the Russiagate. They are the persons that contacted and organized together with officials of the CIA, John Brennan, James Clapper, and so on, the Russiagate operation. So that's the second element of the statement. And then it ends with a section that discusses the now deceased statesman and economist Lyndon LaRouche, who died back in February 2019. And the subtitle is How Project Democracy's Campaign Against Lyndon LaRouche Destroyed American Elections. And so what it basically does is it argues, and I'll just read this part. It says, to understand how it came to pass that American intelligence agencies, acting in collusion with the British foreign power, frauded the 2020 as well as the 2016 elections, it is necessary to understand the use of Executive Order 12333 and other 1980s presidential directives to reorganize and centralize many intelligence functions into the office of the vice president. Now, what this does is this is a sort of an extensive discussion of a case involving Lyndon LaRouche, who as a presidential candidate, and Mr. LaRouche ran a total of something like, I believe, 8 times for office. Over that period of time, Lyndon LaRouche was harassed and persecuted by intelligence agency of the United States. In fact, the statement has a section quoting from the former Attorney General of the United States, Ramsey Clark, and it just indicates that the LaRouche case was the broadest attack on an American elected official, or excuse me, an American figure at any time to the knowledge of former Attorney General Ramsey Clark. This was from a statement that was made back 25 years ago. And so the argument of the statement is because that apparatus was not taken down at the time, it matured, it festered, it marinated, it expanded. And like a bad infection, ultimately infected the entire 2020 presidential election. I think, as everybody knows, as of tonight, the president of the United States refuses to concede that he was defeated. We suspect that he will continue to do so. We also suspect that he may take actions which may end up reversing the outcome that people believe to have occurred, because from the standpoint of the Constitution of the United States, he is not only president until January 20th, 2021, but in fact, were there to be substantive evidence of the nature of the fraud of the process, this could destabilize the circumstance in such a fashion that the real story could come to light. That can be done. And things like the pardoning of Julian Assange, who, after all, remember, is not an American citizen. This is sort of a very funny case. He's an Australian citizen. But the notion that the United States president, especially given the evidence that some of you know came out or was re-emphasized yesterday, detailing a 2011 conversation 9 years ago, where Assange attempted to help the United States State Department suppress certain damage that would have been done because rogue operatives from WikiLeaks had released information without the consent of Assange and others. And he had called the State Department and had conversations with them. So that far from being a person that was damaging American intelligence, he was trying to, in fact, contain damage that people was about to emerge. People did not even know about. And so when that story, or the Edward Snowden story, which is very similar, that rather than him being a traitor, he's actually an American patriot, was trying to call attention to the forms of injustice and double dealing going on inside of the American intelligence establishment. There's also William Binney, or Bill Binney as we call him, who was the whistleblower from the National Security Agency back in 2001, who first wanted to call attention to the fact that the intelligence agencies had failed to detect 9/11 merely because they refused to deploy the systems that they actually had in their possession that would, according to Binney and others, have detected with 100% certainty the attack that became the 9/11 attack because of intelligence that would have come in beforehand. And so we stand tonight in a very interesting world, one which is actually dominated by the United States Constitution, which is not undergoing a crisis, it's undergoing a stress test. The United States is undergoing a stress test in which we'll see whether the people of the United States show up for the debate, for the discussion, and for the process of not merely, quote, transitioning from one president to another, because that's not what this is. This is a circumstance in which we are standing up and confronting not only two separate ways of living, but a very particular set of policies that the Biden administration, which could also be called the O-Biden administration, because it's really an Obama administration, just sort of fronted for a while by Joe Biden, that would be a process in which the Wall Street and City of London bankers would get what they want. And that is not just digital currency, not just a Green New Deal, not just a kind of reorganization of the monetary system, but the systemic and systematic elimination of billions of people from the planet, utilizing things like the COVID-19 circumstance as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. They are pestilence, famine, war, and disease. Pestilence is different. Locusts, for example, is pestilence. So that's what is going on. And so the need for these discussions like the one we're about to have is that we get people thinking about how the options have been provided through the American Constitution for all of us to do our job. And that is to act on behalf of not merely, quote, our rights as citizens, but our duties and our responsibilities to the United States. And in this case, that responsibility is to expose not only the fraud of the election, but to think about what the alternative policies and programs are that we have to put into implementation at this moment, and even as emergency measures, in order that the nation, the republic, be not only preserved, but that the republic prospers. So this is, we wanted to make sure you knew about the statement. It's available, as we say, at the Schiller Institute site. You just look up schillerinstitute.org. I think the statement will come up. All right, so we have assembled several people for a discussion, and I don't know whether Diane has been able to join us or not. She was having a couple of problems before. We have
Yes,
Diane yet?
I'm here. I finally got here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are there. Good, very good. So maybe we should bring up the entire crew that you have assembled here for this discussion, and then you can just take it over. Actually, what I'll do, since you're there, why don't you just hand it over to you, and then you just introduce everybody.
Okay, great. Well, if Jenny is able to show all of us, I'm not sure why. There we go. Yeah, that other one that says Diane. Oh my gosh. At any rate, I was having a war with my computer, and it seems to have logged me in without letting me know, and I had to go and move. So I would, as people know, I'm Diane Sayre. Can you get rid of it over there? I still hear it. Sorry. It's still on one of the computers. At any rate. So I have a
We can hear you
computer
clearly.
that's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is still talking to me from the other side of the room, and Chris can't figure out how to get rid of it. At any rate, that's what happens when you go after digital censorship and other things. So I'm joined tonight by Gary Kanitz, who's a farmer in upstate New York and is my campaign manager. Maybe I presume everyone can see all the people at once, even though I can't. Bob Baker, who is a farm leader with the LaRouche movement. Ron Wieczorek, who's a former congressional candidate and active farmer in South Dakota. Gary's also an active farmer in upstate New York. And I just wanted to say a couple of things because one, I'm sure Dennis talked a bit about the current situation, the ongoing fight, whether there's going to be a challenge to the electors on January 6th in the Congress. I think Mo Brooks is prepared to challenge in the House. We still need a senator. And so much of what's happening really comes down to a question of courage. And courage is an interesting concept because some people mistakenly think that courage has to do with not being afraid. And it's not. Courage is that you do the things that you are afraid of, or maybe you realize that there's something that you should even be more afraid of, which is why you act. And what we are facing, what's behind all of this, we talk about the City of London or the financiers. This apparatus is absolutely at its end. There's a bubble of derivative speculation, which is in the quadrillions of dollars. It cannot last. The people who control that also have a world outlook that human life is not sacred, that human beings are nothing more than animals to be bred, to be herded, and the herd can be culled at will. And as you know, from people like the poor child Greta Thunberg, who I guess may be turning 18 next year, but who clearly was psychologically abused by her crazy mother. They think the world can only hold 1 billion people, and it's the richest people in the world imposing this. So, as I said in the email invitation, the U.S. Federal Reserve Board has now unanimously voted 5-0 that they want to join the network for greening the financial system. And this is part of the Paris Climate Accords. The US would have to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. And then what they're talking about is a group of 30 banks that's going to dictate no credit for anything involving increased productivity, no credit for coal-fired power plants, no credit for natural gas. They're talking about targeting China right now because China has over 300 coal-fired power plants in foreign countries. And the Hudson Institute, which is part of this and also wants to destroy China because that's the main driver of infrastructure and productivity and building on the planet right now. So they're saying that China should be punished for the fact that they are building more than 300 coal-fired power plants in places like Turkey, Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Egypt, the Philippines, and other countries. or they should just simply not build these plants. Now think about it. If you don't build a power plant in Africa somewhere or Indonesia, what are people going to do? Burn wood? Well, that's really good for the environment, or they'll have no energy at all. What does that mean? That means the death rate increases. So what you're talking about is a deliberate program of extermination of the human race being propagated by these financial interests. And what I'm hoping Bob, Gary, Ron will make clear to you in their discussion and dialogue is how this works, particularly with agriculture, and also the alternative, what has to be done to bankrupt this beast and get the credit system that is necessary under LaRouche's 4 laws. So I think I'll just turn it over to Bob, and you guys can all take it from there. Bob, you're muted.
It's an exciting time to be talking.
Try it again. I just thought I did something. You might be good now.
It's an exciting time to be talking about food and agriculture in this period. And I gotta say, I got a great team to talk to you about food with, Ron Wieczorek and Gary. And I know Ron pretty good. I don't know Gary that well, but we had a pretty good meeting the other night. And Gary, I think we're going to get along really good. So the one thing I wanted to say is, I know Ron has some pretty big Charolais cattle out there. I helped him haul hay to him several times out in South Dakota, and maybe I can make it up there to your place, Gary. But the big thing right now is the world is facing a situation where, there's people trying to haul or ship, a couple baby goats to some poor person in Africa, but they forget that that person doesn't have any way to feed the goats. And that's how bad the thing is. We call it physical economics. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and we thought it was time to put the phys back in physical, because this is a very serious situation. If you look behind me there, you see those harvest store silos. Now, that's about the most state-of-the-art creation in food storage you could find. And unfortunately, those are all set and empty because the producers can't afford to put the silage in them, because the big guys are so big that the margins are so tight that they can't do this anymore. So we've got a serious crisis that's unfolding, because what we have is we've got, as Diane said, we have the financial system moving to promote green, meaning environmentally so-called friendly industry and technology, which isn't going to be the most advanced. It's going to be actually moving backwards in terms of the amount of energy it can produce. And you can't build a car plant using energy from windmills. It's not dense enough. So the thing we got to do is we've got to get some nuclear power, and we got to get the pricing structure put back together to support a physical economy. Now let's go back a little ways to the early 1970s, and this is when the bankers organized a big push to get the United States and the world off of a fixed exchange rate. And a fixed exchange rate meant that the money didn't go up and down with a bunch of bets on Wall Street. It stayed the same. And when Nixon unhooked that system called the Bretton Woods system, all of a sudden the US dollar collapsed 50%. All of a sudden the price of livestock and grain in the United States went through the roof, and probably the highest it's ever been in history. And Then all of a sudden the bankers dropped the interest rate, and all of a sudden farmland prices started going through the roof. And that took place for several years until people might remember something called the Volcker 20% interest rates. And when those came in 1 year, farmland prices crashed 60%. And that is what unhooking the dollar from a fixed exchange rate will do. Because up until 1973, the dollar was anchored to physical economics, physical production. And it didn't run up and down with a bunch of speculators. So the thing we're dealing with now is we've got billions of dollars that's being pushed into speculation through Wall Street, through the Federal Reserve. And every time they need to blow up the dollar or Wall Street, they pump a bunch of speculation in it and leverage it. Well, the thing that started taking place when they floated the exchange rate in 1973, they took us off the Bretton Woods fixed exchange rate system worldwide. All of a sudden, all kinds of brokerage houses started coming into the farm country and giving free steak dinners to farmers to come to their meetings about how they should pay them a fee to market their grain and their livestock. And they started hedging and basically betting on the prices. And that wasn't actually hardly even going on before they floated the dollar. So what happened? All of a sudden, the mindset of the population of the rural community and nationally, internationally now, started to shift from the idea that what was important was the integrity of having a community that had physical machinery in it, had infrastructure, roads, bridges, lots of family farms that were in good shape, that could raise a family on one income. And that shifted away from physical to where the important thing was making money. And you had to, I remember the financial advisors started talking to the farmers about, look, you should take the business out of agriculture, take the culture out of agriculture and put in business. And they did. And when that started, slowly the transition went to where the metric of success was making money. And if it meant that you had to shut down the small rural farms and shut down the railroads, shut down the communities, that was okay, because few people were going to make a lot of money, and that was called efficiency. Well, that's not efficiency. That's how you shut down the physical world of production. And then that brings a very important question. How did God create the whole universe without money? I had to think about that one just a little bit, because, he didn't do that. And, but he's got a great sense of humor, and he'll let you play around with that idea a little bit. But then at a certain point, you start seeing everything's going broke. The debt keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and fewer people know how to do physical production. And that is what we're going to change. And that's why I'm really happy to be talking with Ron and Gary tonight, because they're pretty sharp on changing the physical world. And I just leave it there as a kind of a way to get going. Thanks, Diane.
All right. I'm just going to jump in with a couple of thoughts here on that. We're having a little chat before the meeting actually started, and some helped solidify a couple of thoughts I was already having about it. One thing is, and this goes to some things both Diane and Dennis and everybody were already saying, part of what goes on, the way that some of this works on the farming end, is essentially a process you could call culling the farmers. Like Diane was saying, these institutions want to reduce the population, and basically, like Ron was mentioning, a huge wave of bankruptcies in the early 70s following Nixon taking the dollar off gold and deregulating the system, and Bob's also referring to that, eliminating the fixed exchange rate system. One of the ways that this sort of shakes out on the bottom end, when I saw the wave of bankruptcies, it was a little bit later, in the later 1980s into the early 90s. And essentially, you get a situation with these big cartels where they can completely control the retail price of food and the marketability of things. That you have to essentially go through them if you're going to move any large volume. So you'll have a situation where things seem relatively stable, but the profitability of the individual farms are going down gradually, a little at a time. And you hit a crisis point, a series of farms go under, and you'll have a moment in time when the prices are essentially raised back up to encourage the credit lines to some of the larger farmers and reinvestment in those large cartel-oriented production facilities. So you'll have that move forward and keep that investment and production process going, but again, more limited producers and more under the control of these cartels. Then, again, gradually you'll have the ratcheting down, and then another wave of bankruptcies. But then there'll be a moment of, we saw this a couple times in my area recently with milk prices. Ironically, you've gone from a situation where farms with 30 to 50 cows couldn't get dairies to come pick up their milk because they couldn't make enough on the milk product from a 30 to 50 cow dairy to say that it was worth driving the truck around to do it. Shortly afterwards, you got to a situation with them raising the price where you had several Amish and other people start up even 10 to 15 cow dairies, and you even had Amish making special deals with the milk companies where they'd sell a little quarter acre of land, set up their own, put in a separate power line to that so it wasn't on their cult property, and set up bulk tanks to keep the milk cold. So you'd literally have 3 or 4 of these teeny tiny dairies pooling the milk, and the milk trucks would come pick it up. And then now that's again going the other way, where they've just randomly dropped the price and knocking them back out of the system again. So it's just important to keep in mind, because people don't always experience these things in the same way. But it's a very clear, deliberately controlled situation where increasingly the only people that are able to produce are those working with the cartels. So another thought on that. I was actually working with my younger daughter today on some history work. She's studying the American Revolution of all things, conveniently, and something that came up in that. There was a mention of there's always the talk of the Stamp Act and the situation with the tea and sugar and molasses. But there was also this Currency Act where the British basically came in and they said, well, we want everybody to have a hard currency. And so they essentially banned the paper currency process that was allowing the colonies to provide credit locally in areas for their own productivity, for independent industry and agriculture, and to make advances in that. So they essentially shut that down. And the relevance of this, and again, if you look at particularly the Federal Reserve's actions in just declaring that they're going to join this greening of the financial system movement and so on, that essentially where at the time, and obviously it's much worse now, but at the time you had a situation where, the British Empire was this, there was a physical location, there was the king, there was the parliament, there were specific people making these decisions, and they were functioning from the standpoint of some kind of government that we could then, you see it, you know what it is, you can oppose it directly. The part of the problem now is you have that exact same set of decisions being made, where while they're pumping all this money out into the financial system, the credit functions for actual productive industry and agriculture are drying up, and only people who are part of that control system are getting access, part of it, or just capitulating to it, or whatever, convenient for it, to put it another way. But you kind of have to imagine, when you think about the Federal Reserve, when you think about these international banks, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, that these institutions are acting like a foreign power. You know, we always refer to the British Empire being the head of this thing, and there's, obviously that's true, but from a standpoint of the decision-making process, what do people see? They see these financial institutions. They're acting outside of any process of elected representative government. They're not beholden to the Congress, to the Senate, to the presidency, to foreign parliaments. They're not acting on behalf of any nation. They want the elimination of nations. They want to run the world as a dictatorship, in the same way that the British Empire, as a physical power at the time, ran it during that time. And I think I'm hoping that will help, clarify some of that for a few people. That why is it necessary to put these powers of credit creation and the process of distributing that credit into circulation through directed investments in infrastructure, agriculture, industry, science, and technology, why it is absolutely essential that these powers are under the control of elected representative government. There is no way that making that power independent of government is of any possible advantage to humanity at any time. So,
well, I want to just on that point, because a lot of people now would say, well, who cares? The government sucks too. I mean, they say, why is the private, is Wall Street really worse than the Congress? I mean, and I think this is where we really have to get under the skin of the American people, because at least with the Congress, they are nominally elected now. And that's one of the reasons we have to undo this fraud, which gets back to what Dennis was talking about, because you can go there, you can mobilize a resistance against them, you can vote them out if you organize. And I just think that's really important. And it is explicitly what Mark Carney said, that we want to have regime change, that the central bank should be making policy, not the governments. So it really is for the citizenry to stand up. I think it's also why, Ron, you've been saying over and over, we need LaRouche's 4 laws, which is absolutely the case, starting with Glass-Steagall, because what Glass-Steagall would do is bankrupt these derivatives bastards, the too big to fail, too big to jail. They should be put out of business. People should go to jail. But you cannot only do that. You have to have the credit that allows the economy to function and continue on. Oh, Ron, you're muted.
One of the things we really have to get across to the public is agriculture is not the only segment of the economy that's being destroyed by the economic policies. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you look at the businesses that serve the farm, the manufacturers that make the equipment to the farms. I mean, they're all being squeezed by the same financial tactics. And it doesn't matter whether it's agriculture, healthcare, even the banking industry itself is being destroyed. I'm afraid now, very soon, with the the move towards Bitcoin and computer money, that they're going to have total control. I mean, they're going to collect their taxes from your salary right with a push of a button. They're going to be able to shut down your bank account with a push of a button, and the commercial bank sector. That's the only string that we've got left out here that I can see for our young farmers and young producers, unless they're totally unhooked on the insanity of what the cartels are doing. And fewer of those young people are being used as a tool to destroy the independent family farmer. And they're told that you're going to be the survivors. You have to survive. And I mean, again, we're right back to all I can say is Lynn's 4 laws. If we can get those, ingrained in the public's mind, that's absolutely essential to regaining any sense of morality within the American system, we're going to defeat ourselves. I mean, we're just, I've been involved in the agriculture sector for over 60, probably 65 years, maybe even longer than that, even since I was 12 years old, actually. And I mean, we've got farm organizations out here that's been fighting this thing forever, and it continually gets worse and worse and worse till we get back to pushing our president again to be the leader that we need. Things are not going to turn around. And if we lose this battle, I mean, with the office of the presidency right now and the power of that office to fight the complexes that we're up against and the cartels and the financial oligarchy, as Lynn has been telling us for as long as I've been involved with him, and a lot longer than that, I think that's essential.
I think you said something, Ron, just a minute ago, which is key, which is that you said there've been farm organizations that have been fighting this for decades, and the situation gets worse and worse. A lot of people have been fighting in a lot of different ways for decades and decades, and the situation seems to get worse. But I think now we're at this point where the American people, many people, have awakened to the fact that something has gone way off the rails when you walk into a voting place and you think you're voting, and then you have a procedure to count the vote, and it's violated in front of your eyes, and then people tell you, well, you didn't see what you saw, and you're not even, let's say, for the or against the candidate that's winning. We've had a couple of Democrats, as you know, who've testified recently, and just said, I was there, and I wasn't for Trump, but I saw that there was fraud. Then what people that told us there wasn't enough of it to change the outcome of the election. Well, but then it's not said that it didn't happen. Now, some people then try to say it didn't happen, but then others come forward and it's undeniable. And it isn't just in terms of ballot machines, it's in terms of the entire Russiagate narrative. We find out now that in fact, Julian Assange was doing the opposite of what they told us. He was actually trying to help stop damage coming from somebody who was inside of his own operation that was trying to do something he did not authorize. And then they don't tell you that for 9 years, or we don't know it for 9 years, it had been known by people in the government. And so it shows we're in sort of an interesting moment tonight. We live in a constitutional republic. People got used to the idea that all their responsibility was to vote. There's no such thing, and not in the United States. Not if you're a citizen of the United States. If you're a citizen of the United States, you live under 2 documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And if you haven't read it, you might not know that it says, when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same objective, evinces a desire to reduce them, meaning the people, under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. Now, that doesn't mean abolish the Constitution. The Constitution's there so that you have the ability, because of the nature of the Constitution, to change everything. And so when we talk now, and of course, some of us are involved in a project around trying to feed people right now, there's between 30 million and 270 million people, because of the COVID combination with famine, at danger right now, a larger number than anything we've seen since the Second World War. And actions have to be taken. There is a president in the White House right now. He can take those actions. There is us out here. We can take action. So I think it's interesting, going back to what Gary was talking about a few minutes ago, about the way in which the manipulation of the financial system catches people. That's what they're doing with the Green New Deal right now. They're buying people off because a lot of people know there's a hell of a lot of money in solar panels, a hell of a lot of money being thrown around in the form of these credit swaps, carbon swaps, a lot of different things going on with this stuff to buy people and then to claim you'll survive. which of course is exactly the way to sucker punch you into being exterminated, but you just go to the end of the line. You're still on the line, but what happens is that you sell out your community or your trade union or your farmer organization or your constituency for the purpose of going ahead, going to the back of the line so you get eliminated last. I think that with what President Trump has done and just saying, hey, I'm not going to tell you this election was fair and that I lost it because I didn't. The very fact that he's doing that has created this very interesting dissonance in American life where people have been forced to go get their copy of the Constitution and look at the fact, no, you do not live in a democracy. And the reason you don't is because democracies can be very evil forms of government in which, for example, mobs or lynch mobs are the final authority. And in this case, the Electoral College tells a different story. And you can say, well, it doesn't because he's just been shown to have lost these 6 states, but he hasn't been shown to have lost the 6 states. And so it's an interesting time. I just think it's an important thing for everybody to, and a lot of other things might be said by people, but we're in not uncharted waters. These waters were charted. They were charted by the founders. You may get in this circumstance. If you get in this circumstance, this is what you do. And people are saying, oh, we don't know what to do. We got to have martial law. No, you got to read the Constitution. And then you have to actually act on it. So I just think it's, with the farm community particularly, there may be a little bit more hope than with other people, because if they don't fight, then they die. Other people right now have an illusion that maybe that won't happen to them.
I just have a couple little interjections there, and then another thought. One, something in terms of this thing of them buying people off with these green policies and something. There's numerous people around here that one of the things they do is raise sheep, and there's always this challenge of pasturing and feeding the sheep and so on. Well, there's another phenomenon going on around here where the companies that want to put up these solar panels and basically feed the big solar farms and feed the electricity back into the electric grid, they need places to put them. So they're running around and offering to basically do long-term leases on large chunks of acreage to put up these solar panels. And one of the things they figured out is, well, you have to keep the grass clear around these solar panels. So now they're making this deal where you put up the solar panels, you get your short-term cash up front, and then lease payments over a series of years, and you can still raise your sheep that can graze around the solar panels. Of course, the acreage of actual grass growing reduces relative to obviously the sun's not hitting the ground. So let's just say the grass does get a little bit limited. But, you have these kind of things going on, which, I mean, on one level, if you look at it a certain way, so, well, that's, a nice way to make the best of that situation. But in the end, it's like you said, it's, you're just going further to the back of the line. When are you going to be consumed by this monster? The other thing posed by all of this and this issue of looking at the Constitution, if we're going to look at the question of feeding Africa in particular, and questions like, what is going to be our relationship with Russia and China, the question really gets posed as to, what we are, what it means to actually be an American. But to define that, you have to look at what it means to be a human being, and that those are the sorts of questions people are going to have to really be reflecting on, because, well, like you see with the anti-China propaganda around a lot of the people that are otherwise nominally supporting Trump winning this battle to stay in the presidency and to continue to govern. That those kind of confusions you can really only sort out if you really look at what you think it is to be a human being. Because if you limit the idea of a human being to those of us that live under the Constitution, which, nicely does define humanity in a certain way, and you somehow think you can exclude other people, other parts of the world from that idea of what humanity is, then, you're making a bed you don't want to lie in terms of what's going to happen in the world at large. So I just wanted to throw that in as well.
I think another aspect of this thing is the science that's coming out of our universities. I think we really need to overhaul the science. I think about the Democrats screaming and hollering about there's no evidence, and to what's happening here with the vote fraud. And you go right back to the science. I mean, a lot of our science used to be done by the universities. You had a professor that was designated with maybe a federal grant of some kind to investigate something, and he used the students that were in the university to do that. Today, we don't have any of that. We've got the cartels or the pharmaceutical organizations or whatever. They're the ones that are doing the research and the development, and they're the ones that are locking out the potential of all these young people's human, their minds and the image of God that are the creative aspect of of humanity. They've eliminated. I mean, they're controlling us, and look at the kids. A lot of these kids are coming out of the school now with a $500,000 student loan debt. How in the world do they ever pay anything off like that? Under the old system in the universities, I mean, this was done as all this knowledge was owned by mankind, not some financial entity or not some financial oligarch. And that's another aspect that we really got to look at. And I look at, from another scientific aspect of these ethanol plants. I got one sitting down the road here about 6 miles from me. What if we had a fusion plant over there, or even a nuclear plant rather than that ethanol plant? 50% of the corn that is raised here is going into ethanol production. What kind of an insanity of that? It's just a continual spin-off, running trucks up and down the road. I mean, they're consuming more energy than they're producing. Where in the hell's the scientific aspect of that, let alone because some lunatic set up, something you could bet on, like Bob was talking about what they've done to us by bringing these guys in. And rather than talking about production, we're talking about playing games. And you bet against one guy bets against another guy. And what are you producing? I mean, you're nothing but you're just consuming. And that's right down the road.
What you're saying, Ron, it gets back to what Bob was saying about could God create the universe without money? Because I was just thinking, well, isn't this peculiar? One, you have the solar panels story, the solar panels over the sheep. Then you have the ethanol taking the corn. You have the discussion of if all the farmers don't survive, well, hello, how do we eat? If all the farmers don't survive, there's a bunch of others of us who are not going to survive also. Does anyone ever think about that? Or do they say, oh, well, it's good. We can make more money with solar panels than we can by, having crops or by having cattle. I mean, it really gets at this insanity of thinking of everything in terms of money and not.
I even talked to my doctor, he talks to me back from that standpoint. He's got to, he's got to run the hospital. Actually, one of my friends owns an industry and owns a hospital. There's got money in the hospital that they've created there in Sioux Falls. It's a specialty hospital. But I mean, he's still got to live in this this environment where money determines what the hell he can do rather than saving people. He's got to balance these numbers on a piece of paper to justify what he's trying to accomplish for good. I mean, it's not only destroying agriculture; it's destroying everything. And I was one of the first guys that ever. I put a little corporation together and got 7 other farmers here in, and we got the first federal grant to do a feasibility study on an ethanol plant. Well, it wasn't 3 months after I got to looking at it and looked at what Gurney's done here in South Dakota during World War I, when the federal government pushed them to run an ethanol plant, and within 6 months after World War I, it was shut down because there was no place to go with the ethanol. And even Gurney's, they had filling stations all over South Dakota, and parts of Iowa, Minnesota, they didn't even use their own ethanol in the filling stations back then. The same thing happened with them in World War II. They reopened, rebuilt and reopened a plant down there at Yankton. A year after World War II, the plant was locked up. And I went down there and researched through some of the libraries and talked to some of the old timers that worked there. And I come back and told the group that I had created that we should give the money back. We'd spent probably a couple $1,000s of it. I said, this is a no-go thing back then. And I can't, to me, it just drives me nuts how these colleges could come out, or how they could come up with a concept that this is an efficient way to do business. But again,
Ron, that is really puts it the bullseye right where it should be. And that is what we're going to do is we're going to do like Lincoln with agriculture. Okay. And, we had a very important meeting, just several group of people stepped forward in terms of a discussion about how to get some food over to Africa to set an example of what you should be doing. Well, right here, we're talking about physical production. So let's just look at what you just said. I mean, it's all right there on the table. Lincoln, when he was trying to get the economy stimulated, he had a rich resource. He said, oh my God, hey, we got millions of acres out in the Midwest. Why don't we get some people out there and start doing some physical production? Like build some railroads, and all of a sudden there's people going out there getting 160 acres, building a house, starting a farm. Now, we got a rich resource right now. It's kind of like millions of acres. It's called a whole bunch of farmers that are going to retire in the next 15 years that do not have anybody that wants to come back on the farm. That's a rich resource. Now, that's a great way to establish 1 million new farmers. If we could get these retirees to team up with some good, hardworking young guy, and with Lynn's 4 laws enacted, now this is a purpose. So all of a sudden, we've got a credit system. We've got a national bank to extend credit to young farmers. We got the Glass-Steagall Act in, so that's going to regulate the banks, so they got to be a servant to the production. And we're going to give these retired farmers a little tax break for retiring and linking up with the young farmer. And if we play our cards right, let's reorganize the pricing system so that young farmer is going to get parity prices for his commodities. And if that retired farmer wants to team up with him, he's going to get parity prices too. And that's going to make a lot of older retired farmers really think about getting into that thing in terms of physical production. And you see to start committees around the nation and say, wow, look at all these farmsteads that are sitting here hanging by a fingernail. Well, what if we reestablish them? What if we sort of passed a Homestead Act of the 21st century? And we say, okay, we got little communities. They're boarding up all the buildings. They still got streets, roads, bridges. And so that's a type of thing that you create a vision for the population in a rural community. And you could get a lot of people fired up about that if we had the 4 laws put in, which is a good reason to really fight for it. And also, it's really a heck of a good reason to talk to people wherever you're at, because even people living in the city would get ignited around that idea, and they participate in it, because now you start folding in different things we've had people discuss on our conferences, like, more and more local food distribution networks run by the local community, and so that we have a process set in motion so that we can phase out monopolies, and we can phase in owner operator businesses for culture and not for money. And you see, when we start doing that, and you're going to see the churches get ignited, you're going to see choruses. I mean, all these little rural communities. I don't know about South Dakota, but I know in Iowa, they all had a band shell, they all had an opera house, and you did too. You guys all did, and you know what do they do now? Play a bunch of rotten music in them. But the point is, hey, that's called a cultural revolution, and we could get people very excited about building back a community so that the focus is the cultural development for the next 50 years. And that's the kind of discussion you could get communities, whether it's in the city, rural communities, medium-sized cities. People would eat that up because it gives their life a mission. And you know, it's like a farmer. You know, he gets a farm. You know, he's thinking about what that farm's going to look like 60 years later, and he'll go through all kinds of crazy stuff and withstand all kinds of floods and hailstorms and weed infestations and bankers squeezing him. But the point is that that's the kind of orientation in terms of Lynn's 4 laws that we got to tack on to the 4 laws, the vision of how to actually manifest it in terms of, you know, boots on the ground, shovels in the dirt, and people pulling out a bag full of nails and pulling their electric hammer out.
I think we even got to look bigger than that, Bob. I think we got to look at NWAPA and expanding. You know, so far we're talking about, you know, reorganizing the land that we're already operating. But we've got to look at what they've done with NWAPA and a proposal to create an opportunity for another 500 million people to live in the southwest part of the United States, just like they did in Central Valley of California under Roosevelt. I mean, where they turned a desert into the most productive land on the face of the earth. And today it's going backwards on a scale that's mind-boggling. And we're bringing in food from South America and Mexico and even from Africa, where the people are starving to death. I mean, this insanity's got to come to an end. And you know, we just got a bit more ahead of us. And certainly, if you know, if we talk about developing Africa at the same time, but just to back up a second here, when I think of the abortion that took probably 60 to 100 million people out of the picture, plus their offspring, when we're talking about go forth and multiply, I mean, that's not going forth and multiply. And the people that are starving, the people that are dying because of COVID. I mean, we've got to stop this somehow immediately. And even in Africa, I mean, there's no reason that Africa couldn't be developed like Roosevelt was developing, or like the Chinese are doing in China. You know, right now the Chinese have got a proposal to do an environmental control, a weather modification program that will cover an area the size of India, the country of India in northwest China, which is nothing but desert and mountains, basically. And we've got this is the kind of talk we've got to talk. We got to be talking big time. I mean, scare these people with what we're going to do for the generations in the future. If we're not living in the future, we're going backwards. That's one thing I got from Lynn that it really grew on me is live in the future and talk in the future. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to have a presence. If you're just talking present time. So, we need to do what you just said, because I look down the road again at this stinking ethanol plant, and there should be, a nuclear plant or a fusion plant sitting there. And we should be, right beside it should be a hydroponics plant. Right beside that should be a food processing plant. Why are we hauling food from Mexico into South Dakota when we should be doing it right here next door? But we've got an insane financial system that justified, a science that is totally, environmentally insane.
Well, that
And let me ask you a question. Hold on, Bob, for a minute. So this is obviously just like jumped into some really exciting areas, Diane. So what do you want to do? Continue?
I think we should go on a little. I also, believe it or not, wanted to bring in a couple of Ron's friends. I think Jose may have had to jump off, but Jenny, who was out in South Dakota, but Bob should continue. But Jenny, if you want to unmute your video and also jump in, we can go for like another 20 minutes, I would say.
Great.
well, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, I mean, there's so much that has been brought up that comes to my mind. I mean, for example, during Andrew Jackson's administration, there was a huge, near the end of it, there was a huge collapse because there was a farm bubble that was created out of Auburn, Ann Arbor, Michigan, which was created because basically the speculators from Wall Street came over to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and created the basically mortgage-backed security type thing out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, which because the farmers weren't able to keep having their loans increase all the time with this huge bubble that was exploding. Within about a span of 5 to 8 years under Andrew Jackson's administration, it created a huge financial collapse, and which is exactly what we've been seeing, what Lynn and LaRouche has always been saying is happening. And we have so many examples of how the imperial policies work. They try and rape and pillage every aspect of human culture to be able to sustain their dead, collapsing system. It was born to die, and you see that always. And I mean, what Lynn has always emphasized is that, just like what you said, Ron, we have to be living and breathing in the future. And he always, brought up things like NWAPA and the North American Water and Power Alliance and the space program, things that actually bring real optimism, because human beings don't want to be living in the present. They want to be living in the future. That's what's exciting. Their children, their grandchildren, what are they going to be living like? And that's, being around farmers my entire life. I mean, that's a farmer, and they're always thinking about, what are we going to give our grandchildren, our great grandchildren? It's going to, they're always thinking that it's going to be a lot better than what I had to deal with. So, I mean, there's so much that has to be done. And the way to do it is by, what you said, Ron, living and breathing in the future. And we just got to get the true American tradition, which is, our fellow patriots actually thinking of themselves as people of the solar system or the galaxy, that we're going to go beyond and beyond, because that's the future. That's what mankind's supposed to be doing. That's what I have to say.
Well, I want to jump back in because see, I'm not sure what the lay of the land is where you're at, Gary. But we're thinking about back in Lincoln's day, all that land out there was like, people were going like, who wants to go out there? I mean, it's it's nothing out there. And then all of a sudden, of course, there's something out there. What you need is people and creativity. But see, we also got something else. You can say, oh, the farm crisis, wow, there's hardly any farmers left. Well, the big thing is there's a whole bunch of them left that are just about ready to retire, and they're going to turn their land over. So what if we shift all that back into some real young productive people with a new economic system and a new pricing system and a vision that goes big, and that starts tapping into the new NOAPA, starts tapping into the new nuclear power plants that we're going to be building. We'll probably have a lot of little ones. People could maybe even have one per farm. Who knows? But the thing is, it's a let your imagination wander. And let's take that program and let's set it in motion all across Africa. Let's have 1 million new farmers in Africa, or maybe 2 million. But the point is, we got the most advanced technology, space science, all that stuff. We got enough technology. We could have all kinds of small, very productive food producers, and they could be very happy doing the cultural stuff, because that's what they don't have time for, because everybody's getting looted by a money system. And let's go back to a physical economic system, put that money system under the control of Glass-Steagall, launch the infrastructure bank. I mean, you walk in, you say, hey, I got an idea. And if it sounds like it's got half a chance, you get the money. And you start building an asset that becomes that becomes the collateral that backs up your loan. You don't wait, and you just go for it. But I don't know if that works where you're at, Gary.
Absolutely. Actually, I had a couple of thoughts there, just bringing together part of what you were saying, which I really like, and with what Ron was saying, because this issue of getting exactly those kind of people, these older farmers and so on, who have a lot of experience, they have a certain amount of assets and land and so on, in touch with people that would be in a position to spend a bigger chunk of their life providing that food production and other kinds of production, because there's all kinds of other areas where you can go with this too. But in terms of what Ron was saying, you take a challenge like this issue of the fact that we need to deal with the starvation in Africa right now, and you have this really, really deep cynicism in people that, well, you're just giving food away to people that aren't doing anything anyway, they're just starving, they're never going to get ahead, and people need to just completely throw out that idea and look at it from this standpoint of, like what Ron's saying, that, looking at the future, that population there, they are, they are just as human as anybody else, any place else in the world. They're under the same, it's not just that they don't have food. It's not just that their farms are failing or that they don't have development. Is that they are literally living under the foot of a global fascist establishment that wants to wipe them off the face of the earth and steal the resources under the ground. And if you take that into account, what's really required is the political transformation to give these people some kind of power over determining their own destiny. If that is done, they will do the production. They will have the progress. We can help them with the technology and things and bring that in. But you take the young people there, the children there, you get that development, and that's what we have to think of when we think of addressing this issue of the starvation in Africa or these other problems in the world. That's the mission orientation, to turn them into a advanced group of nations, that then it is no longer a crime but a privilege to be bringing food or other things in trade, because they'll have things we don't, and then there could be meaningful trade in things that are actually of interest and increase the diversity that we all have in our diets and all those kind of things. So you have to picture that world in which the nations of Africa are participating as fully developed, advanced nations. On the other side of it, from the standpoint of Bob's program, there's one thing that I think is important, and again, it's from the problem side of the standpoint, but again, it gets at why the new Bretton Woods, Glass-Steagall, and everything involved with LaRouche's 4 laws are so important. and that's that. Like, I'll just put it down to the situation I'm in with the beef production. I recently went through a series of classes for what's called beef quality assurance, which is a program to help deal with the carcass condition of the animals that are going to market and stuff, to make sure that the maximum amount of that animal is being able to be used for the best possible quality cuts of meat, and also avoiding things like, you know, antibiotics residues and all those kind of things. So that's all great. People should totally do it. But what ends up getting the context in which it ends up getting discussed is, well, you know, if you have the certification and you do all these things right, and the packing plants are already know and have confidence that this is how you're handling your beef, you can get some small margin more price for your particular animals, right? So instead of losing, you know, $100 or $300 an animal, you only lose one or two, maybe, you know. When you talk about, you know, the price per pound on these things, that you're talking about all these improvements a lot of the time, and you spend a lot of time figuring out, okay, you know, vaccination schedules and how to get the animals the best possible diet and the maximum weight gain over the period of time in which you're trying to do that, and everything from when you castrate them to how many times you load them on a trailer. You know, it's all this super intensive micromanagement to try to get these very, very small margins of benefit. And you start looking at doing this and the costs involving doing this, the having the farm, the building the fences, everything you got to do, harvesting the crops to feed, you know. And then, you know, the market, the futures market or whatever goes up or down 10 or 15%, and you're still out of business. I mean, so again, those are the kind of things that have to be, when you're taking those young people and getting them working with these older retired farmers and saying, okay, here's the plan. It can't be a gambling casino that you're throwing them into. If that's, you know, people talk about people not wanting to work, right? Why? I mean, other than lunatics like me, you know, why would somebody want to put that kind of time and effort into the study and the labor and everything else to do that kind of production, only when they would know fully well that no matter what they do, you know, a small fluctuation in the market, a change in a packing house, and for the dairy farmers, you know, a slight difference in the price of milk is going to be the difference of whether they survive or not. It has nothing to do with how hard they're willing to work, or how advanced the technology they're using, or how good their management is. And I think, you know, Ron I think mentioned that before we got started, you know, this whole lie of all of a sudden the farmers became bad managers, and that's why they were going out of business. And that this is the biggest piece of BS out there. Oh, it was you that said it? So,
well, that's a good point, because
yeah,
you see what you end up with is you end up with a situation where the more efficient you are, according to this monopolies, then the faster you go broke.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because to get efficient, you got to go deep into debt, but you got to volunteer yourself to the market, and the market is totally rigged.
Yeah.
So
that has to be addressed. If you're going to have that inspiration and have that program work, bringing those young people in, you there's no way to do it on a massive scale. I mean, you'll always find a few crazy people, right? But there's no way to do it who are just good crazy people, not the other kind. But the only way to make it work on a massive scale is you have to address that underlying issue. The system has to be regulated so that, and like you mentioned with parity pricing, so when people go into that kind of debt and they dedicate themselves to that kind of work, that they at least can have some reasonable expectation that there's going to be some correspondence to what the return on investment was when they started versus what it is 10 years down the road. That has to be something you can actually plan, and you cannot plan it in the current system. So therefore we have to win on all fronts.
Well, what you're saying makes me think of what's happened in China, where they've had a totally dramatic shift that people can see in their own lifetime. The standard of living has completely dramatically improved. And that is so possible in the entire continent of Africa. And I think this is something that the British Empire fears more than anything, because if you just look at a globe, what is this landmass that you call Africa, 54 countries, I think now, or 55, with enormously rich soil, massive rivers that could generate power and irrigation, a huge number of young people who can become geniuses. And I think, what is it? Dennis can tell me if it's right, 2.5 billion people or something in, by when? 2050?
2050.
Yeah. So that could be, that entire continent could be a renaissance. I mean, just among the nations there, a dialogue of civilization. Clearly, the Chinese are thinking about the potential from that standpoint for the good. And if we had any sense here, if we thought like John Quincy Adams or Abraham Lincoln, or the way Lyndon LaRouche thought, we would be in a kind of a leapfrogging where we'd be having a whole bunch of young people trained in medical skills or whatever, going over there to work with them to get things going, but then also coming back here and saying, well, why the heck do we have all this? You know, you fly over the United States and you get past the between in the Midwest, as you get to the Rocky Mountains, there's just nothing, nothing and nothing and nothing. We should be building science cities in the United States. I think that's part of the way what Ron was describing, having nuclear power plants here or there, or hydroponics or whatever. We should have science cities in these areas. In the state of New Jersey, 20% of the state is the Pine Barrens, and apparently in the 80s they were planning to build a fusion science city there. Now there's nothing. You're not allowed to do anything there. Manhattan, New York City is being completely destroyed. My friend Derek Gibson, who's running for governor of New York, was saying, well, we should be building new cities outside of New York, but also you can move people there temporarily, fix New York and move them back in, and have a couple of, I mean, there's all these options. There's all these options. Now I got a note, Jose said that he's prepared to say something if he's still on, and I think Dennis might have something, and we have to end soon. And I have one thing I want to announce before all those things happen, which is next Friday is Christmas, but we're still going to be here Christmas at 8 p.m. because we're going to talk about George Washington's crossing. And if he could do it on Christmas Day, so can we. But Jose, are you there?
Yes. Hello. Hi. Can I be heard first of all?
Yes.
Okay. I'll be very, very brief. I'm trying to be simultaneous. I just wanted to say that the idea of a space CCC can actually apply to all aspects of food, medicine, medical infrastructure, and of course, space. I mean, if people watch these Living New Deal videos that were made back in the 30s, you'd be shocked, especially like the one that they made for Chicago and New York. It actually can inspire you because you see the love and hard work that those people back in the 30s coming out of a Great Depression put into this country for us. I mean, the Henry Hudson Parkway, the FDR Drive, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, all of those things that look like crap today were built. I mean, we use them today. I mean, life would be completely different without them, but that was like a big government project. And that can be applied to food, medicine, space, and advancements in methods of transportation and infrastructure. There's no reason we can't have that today and better. There's actually more things we can do today than we could back then. And that's all I want to say.
I'd like to interject something very quickly here, and that is this idea that older farmers are essential to making this work. Actually, the two young people that were just talking, they were out in South Dakota. Actually, this old farmer right here learned more from those two people than I learned from them. Or I mean, they learned from me. And I think what we have to do is, we have to go back to the concept when the Pilgrims come that they were going to create heaven on earth. And what is heaven? Heaven is nothing but the best dreams that your mind can come up with. And that's what we got to work towards. And all the science that we can put into it, all the creativity that we can develop between the ears. Well, too many of these old farmers are hooked on logical thinking, and I mean it destroys creativity. So my hope on most old farmers are they're locked into their old ways, and of course there's some that you know their mind is still young, but too many of them are. So we need that new paradigm that Lynn was talking about, a totally new concept, and that's what the future. That's where the future is. Of
Okay.
course, the best from the past with us, but I mean, a new paradigm is a total new way of looking at things.
Okay, Jose and Ron, you just put it all together, because now what we need is 1 million astronaut farmers, 1 million new
Amen.
astronaut farmers, and we're going to get the people in the city excited about it, and the astronaut farmers are going to get the older farmers excited because they're going to teach them all about their smartphones and all their technology, and they're going to get so energized learning new stuff that they're going to fight like hell to make sure that lasts forever. And that's an idea that I think is in harmony with what Lynn would kind of set things in motion for.
Yeah, I completely-
Happily, the Chinese just got us a nice soil sample for that approach.
Right.
yeah, I completely agree. I want to bring this.
I think John F. Kennedy had a good concept of that with his program.
We got to bring this to close, everybody. This has been a good discussion, but I want to say a few things for people about tomorrow. Diane will be starting us off tomorrow on our program, which is on Saturday at 2:00. It's Schiller Institute program. We're basically going to be talking a lot about thinking like Beethoven. What we mean by that is that the musician Ludwig van Beethoven was being celebrated all over the world. 2 days ago was his 250th birthday. The Schiller Institute had a concert last night because some people argue that's the day he was baptized. They also celebrate that. And so we're going to start out tomorrow with her giving a presentation. Diane created the New York City Chorus back 6 years ago, the Schiller Institute New York City Chorus. And it has performed in many different locations, including at Carnegie Hall. But it also figured out a way, despite the COVID pandemic, to do additional performances. And so this is what you're going to be seeing an excerpt from tomorrow. So that'll start us off. It'll be at 2:00 tomorrow. So I'm going to urge the people, take a look at that, because the question is, what does that have to do with farming, with space, with politics, with the presidency, with the Constitution? What does that whole idea of thinking have to do with that? And I'll only say this: Beethoven considered himself to be a citizen of the world, as everybody knows from the Ninth Symphony. And the music he wrote echoes through now 200 years after his death, the whole world. But it's a kind of thinking which Linda LaRouche used to talk about all the time as being no different than the kind of thinking that a creative scientist does, or anybody involved in creative work does. And this notion of culture, think about the word agriculture and the word culture. There's a reason for that. It's the idea of the development, the enhancement of natural circumstances. That the most beautiful thing is not nature, but it is the changes in nature, the improvements, the advancements, the recognition of the processes of nature that you get from what human interaction with it creates. We have to remember we're part of it. People like to say that we're part of it, but they don't even consider that maybe the thing that we're here to do, which is unique among all of the so-called animals, is that we think. We can reason, we can reflect, we can conceive of the idea of the whole thing, not any one process, not any plant or animal or vegetable process, or not even any particularly merely human process, but the extraterrestrial, the larger galactic, the larger universal processes are all things that we can talk about. We can talk about the life and death of planets. We can talk about what we do, which is wrong, and what we can do, which is right. As far as we know, so far, we're the only species that we've encountered that does that. So we can't assume simply, well, we can probably say that there's somebody else out there in some way. Maybe so. But what if it's the case that in this sector of, for example, our galaxy, that in fact, we may be the only sentient beings doing that? Maybe there's a responsibility that we're supposed to carry out. And we're supposed to get ourselves off this particular planet and not only explore the other planets, but actually be back in touch with those other forms of life that are mentation, because the idea of the process of thought is also a natural process. It's part of the universe. It's the universe itself thinking of itself. Maybe that's what human beings are. We don't know. And so the whole idea is that what we want to leave you with as we transition now to tomorrow is the idea that the presidency that we're looking at, the confrontation with the Constitution of the United States that we're all undergoing, you look at all the processes we've just described, this is a case where we need a new composition. We have to recompose our country right now. We have to take it above the political differences, the ethnic differences, the religious differences, and so on. We have to recompose it completely. And so thinking like Beethoven means to think about how to recompose in the form of music in his case, and in our case, in the form of economy and politics, how to recompose the human condition. Often humanity doesn't do this. That's why you have so many, history is littered with failed societies. But the United States is the society that is based on the idea that a revolution does not mean something bloody, not something violent. It means a change in the axioms of your thinking. And so the whole idea of these symposia is to give you ideas, present you with ideas you might not have heard, or maybe you did hear them. Maybe you heard them and you can't discuss them with other people. Maybe you've heard them and thought a lot about them, but you don't know who to talk to about them. Or maybe you heard them and just figured, well, it'll never happen, so maybe I should forget it. No, we say that this is the new politics of America. It's got to be the new deliberation. It's got to be what people begin to discuss as they close out this year, which has been a most tumultuous year, and have to have an approach by reflection on how they want to approach this new America in the new year. So on behalf of Diane Sayre and the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre, we want to say goodnight to everybody. You can see us here next week, and you can see us tomorrow at the Schiller Institute site at 2 p.m. See you then.
Good night. Thanks.